Okay, here we go. Welcome to the Data Security Talk, the podcast that keeps you updated with trends and approaches to business data security. Why do we do this? Because it's always been and will always be about the data. I'm Bill Falk, president of go-to-market for Actifile. And today I'm thrilled to be joined by my friend, colleague, and business partner, Steve Rutkovitz from Choice Cyber Solutions.
Hey, Bill, how you doing?
Good, Steve. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the group?
Great. My name is Steve Rutkovitz. I was an MSP for 21 years, built a pretty good MSP in the Baltimore, Washington area. And in 2017, I had an opportunity and I had a successful exit, and we built out a pure play security and compliance company called Choice Cyber Solutions. Today, we have a compliance and cybersecurity company. We offer about 20 different compliances and/or privacy cybersecurity or privacy compliances. And we about 50% of our business right now is CMMC because it's so big right now. And we are an authorized RPO with the Cyber AB and the DoD, and we help companies get ready and take them all the way through the from assessment all the way through to certification for CMMC 2.0.
That is great. And we're going to do our best to make this very dry topic as entertaining and as informative as we can for the audience. We're going to do our best not to tell the audience things you may already know, but we're going to do our best to cover a lot of ground. But as you indicated, this is all about CMMC and what our feelings are and the learnings that have come to us that we want to share to the market, to the contractors themselves, and to the MSPs or MSSPs that may be serving those clients. So before we jump into the formal or informal Q&A, just give me an indication of what you see as the big picture and what is really happening in this market.
So big picture wise, we've gone from kind of this interim role to the final role, which means that companies that are in the supply chain of the DoD contracts will have to have a CMMC 2.0 certification. So big picture, about 80,000 companies in the US and actually internationally will need to meet this certification as it's phased in starting in March. And the goal here is to really protect the defense industrial base, right? So, if you think about it, I just saw the other day that the Chinese came out with a brand new plane called a J-35, and it looks exactly like our F-35. So there's been so much theft and kind of palming off of our technology. Hopefully, we're able to really tighten things up and really secure the home industrial base and become, as we develop all these new technologies, they're more secure long term.
Mm-hmm. And so everybody's hearing a lot about CMMC and CMMC 2.0. What's the update and what's different between 2.0 and prior versions of CMMC?
Well, the prior versions, it's been several, iterations. And again, when you're dealing with the government, it takes time, right? So they don't rush anything. So they had a CMMC 1.0, and it actually had 5 levels of cybersecurity maturity. And in CMMC 2.0, it moved to 3 levels. So there's level 1, 2, and 3. Level 1 is a self-assessment under 17 controls. Level 2 is 110 requirements or controls in the NIST 171, and that's what the certifications are against. There's also a level 3, which is against a NIST 172 framework, and those audits will be available for companies that do more heavy level, let's say, sensitive or top secret kind of work, and those audits will be available, sometime in the next 24 months or so.
Great. So maybe you could take a stab at like decoding the different levels and maybe talk about like which one might apply to to individuals in our audience?
Yeah, so when we're working with a client, usually the first thing a customer asks us is either they tell us they think they're a version or they're not sure what level they are, right? So we got to help companies understand what level they actually fall into. The whole thing is based on CUI, or controlled unclassified information. So when a company is actually storing or transmitting or processing CUI, they're responsible to actually have what's called a level 2 certification. For companies that have FCI or federal contract information, not storing, housing, or processing any type of CUI, then they can go with a level 1. The problem is when we look at most companies, the CUI is marked by the government. And when we do scans with like Actifile to take a look and rest it in motion, we normally see CUI data. So what happens is most companies that are doing work in the DoD do fall under level 2. I have seen companies that do very generic things for the government, like sell Microsoft Word. They may or may not need a certification. They may just fall under level 1.
Excellent. And okay, so you brought up CUI. You mentioned the definition for one of the many acronyms that our government is famous for creating, but maybe demystify a little bit, like what exactly needs protection, like if there's a way to generalize it, and then can you give an example of what an example of CUI data might be?
Yeah, so CUI is controlled unclassified information. So when you think about it, it's sensitive data that really needs to be protected, but it's not top secret. So maybe an example would be, let's say I'm a landscape company and I'm doing work for the White House, right? I'm doing the landscaper for the White House. I'm the contractor, and I have to have all the blueprints for the White House. So I know where all the like hiding rooms are, where the special rooms are with special technology and whatnot. So this isn't really top secret information, but if it got in the wrong hands, they could use it, and cause a lot of damage or problems. So that's an example of CUI. It's sensitive, but not top secret. And there's actually quite a few categories of CUI, and that's one of the challenges right now. It's marked by the government, but it's a pretty wide spectrum of kinds of information. It varies everything from drawings down to social security numbers, and everything in between.
Very good. So how about explain the difference between CMMC, which is a regulation, it's a compliance regulation, and something like NIST 171, which might be a standard, or maybe it's a different definition. Can you help describe the difference?
Yeah, so the NIST, most people know what NIST is, National Institutes of Standards and Technology, which is the Department of Commerce. They basically come out with different kind of frameworks and requirements. One that they have is based on the cybersecurity framework, and what the Cyber AB did was take the NIST 171, which has 110 requirements. Now, when you look at those requirements, like number one might have an A, B, and C. So when you look at the controls that have to be met, it's 110 requirements, but there's actually 320 actual items that have to be satisfied with documentation. And that's the NIST 171 set of controls. Now, the audit process, or third-party audit that comes in to look at these controls, and then kind of you have to prove to them they're in place, and the auditor comes in, that's the CMMC 2.0 certification. So with the interim rule, you are allowed to do a self-assessment, but as you move into the final rule and the contracts start having CUI in the documents, everybody in the supply chain, you can bid on a contract without a CMM certification. You can't get awarded a contract without CMM certification once it's in the contract. And the CMMC 2.0 is the actual certification process of the NIST 171.
Very good. And how many controls are there in NIST 171?
Right. So the word controls a little bit. Sometimes you hear the word controls, but pretty much is 110 requirements. But if you add up the 1A, 2B, 1C, etc., there's 320 actual, I would call, individual controls that have to be met, where you have to have evidence and proof that you have to show the auditor. So it's a lot of work getting these companies really ready for and be prepared for the actual audit.
Very good. So if you're a contractor or an MSP that might be serving a contractor, are there best practices? Is there like a roadmap for building CMMC compliance that you could share?
Yeah, so we've done quite a few projects. I think we've done over 60 projects and help companies get ready. So when we talk to an auditor, they're like, hey, you got the hard part. The readiness work's the hard part. So what we do is we actually have to start off with what's called an assessment. Every compliance we do, we always start off the assessment. And the reason is you have to get a baseline to look at all the good things that are in place and see what's missing. So you have to be able to map that out. Now, the requirement basically says you have to have a risk assessment and you have to produce what's called an SSP. That's a system security plan. That's all the controls or all the requirements, and you have to show whether they're in place, right? Whether they're missing or they're partial. And you have to document how all those controls are met. And that's pretty much the scoping document that's used for the actual audit. And then once you do the SSP, and we help companies build that SSP from scratch, then you have to have what's called a POAM. A POAM is a plan of actions and milestones. That's the missing controls, and that specifically is prescriptive to how you're going to implement the missing controls and a timeline around that. And the third thing we have to do now is actually input what's called a score, and that's an SPRS score that goes up to the DoD website that actually shows the score. The highest score is a 110, the lowest score is a negative 106, and you get points for certain things that are in place or deducts for things that aren't in place. So that's what's been in play over the last couple of years. Now, companies, if they don't have the CMMC clause yet, still have to play by this rule and have the updated score on a regular basis, the annual risk assessment, and do all these things, but you can have a POAM. Once it goes to CMMC and you start having the requirement for an audit, the POAM goes away, which means you could still have some things outstanding as long as you're showing that you're working on it. But once the CMMC comes in place, the POAM goes away and you have to have all 110 requirements in place and proof that you have them.
And so we hear of, I would say, like some confusion about this whole self-assessment eligibility versus a third-party assessment. Can you comment on those?
Yeah, so the level 1 is a self-assessment. Level 2, as I understand it, is going to be certifications. They might have some contracts with self-assessments. I don't know, but it looks like it's going to be all third-party assessments for everybody that's in the supply chain. So the contract is going to spell what this contractor has to have. So if it doesn't have a CMMC clause, then you may be able to get by with a self-assessment. But if it has a CMMC clause, you will have to have a third-party audit and a certification. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Okay.
And the follow-on question to this is, because we're all in technology, where does automation come in to this to help streamline the assessment and the ongoing requirements?
Yeah, so I could break it down. So when we look at any of these frameworks, these compliance frameworks like NIST and NIST 171 controls, you really have three components. You have an administrative component, which are like policies, procedures, documentation, training, all the things that are administrative, vendor management, the list goes on and on. Then you have the technical controls. Those are the layers of security that have to be in place. And then you have kind of physical controls. There's not a whole lot of physical controls, but if you're a manufacturer, you need to have like a visitor program. When people come in, they have to log in and make sure that that's all recorded, and a plan and a policy for visitors. You have to have things like card access. So when you break down a compliance, it's administrative, technical, and physical. And then those controls have to be broken down. And then sometimes you have policies and procedures, but the technology is really important, because when we start a risk assessment, we run scanning tools like Actifile that'll actually scan for the CUI and rest in motion. So a lot of times a client will say, I think I'm level 1, but we'll do a scan and they're actually level 2. And the reason is we can see CUI data at rest and in motion. Now, a lot of people talk about an enclave, right? How do you scope the job? Sometimes if we only see CUI to a subset of users, we can reduce the scope of work or reduce the scope of the audit. And that's something that when we do the risk assessment, we help companies figure out, do we have to get the whole company certified, or can we have a reduced scope? And that's something we spend a lot of time helping companies do. If they can get a smaller scope of work, then the audit and everything's kind of less expensive. It could take less time as well. But then once we do the assessment, we have to make sure that the right layers of security are in place. Things around vulnerability scanning. I think there's 4 controls that require you to run routine vulnerability scans, make sure the patching and updating and the remediations of these vulnerabilities are in place. And then you have to have reports and show the auditor that it's current, right? That you've been doing it on a regular basis and it's current. Things like auditing and logging, there might be like 7 different controls that have to do with auditing and logging around technologies like SIM to look for abnormal behavior. And you have to look at these logs on a regular basis. So if something were to happen forensically, you can go back and see who logged into what and when. So these are some of the technologies that have to be implemented around the controls and policies and procedures.
It sounds like there's a lot. There's just a lot of technology and process and so forth that the contractor and their service provider need to be involved in. We hear a little bit about, some pushback maybe from the subcontractors, maybe the smaller ones, because of its impact to their business operations and how pervasive this is. What are you seeing in the market?
Well, it's an expense. Yeah, I've been doing compliance for 7 years now, and I got to tell you, nobody gets excited about compliance, right? They have to do it, right? But what we're finding is that if you hire the right company and you really understand your business and your technology and how it all works, we're able to put in these very practical solutions. So you're going to have to add layers of security. You're going to have to tighten things up. You have to have a set of like 16 policies around disaster recovery, incident response, access control. But once this is put in place, it's just a matter of keeping up with it. Like there's changes that go on, but the hard part's done in the beginning. And the truth is, every company should really have this in place to protect not only their business, but everybody in their supply chain. The audits, I would say, are a little bit pricey. And they're all over the board. So we're shopping. Once we get a customer assessed and we help them build out all the controls and all the evidence and all the policies and procedures, we actually go out and shop the audits for them. And currently, I think there's 49 companies in the country that do CMMC audits, and the prices vary all over the board. And we've been able to help companies shop out those prices and get them, greatly reduced in certain cases, because our readiness work is so good.
So we're hearing again in the market where there is call it an ROI or a cost justification for this effort, because for some contractors, if they don't do this, then they're not going to be able to bid on some lucrative government work, right? And so it's going to threaten the survivability of their company, and then they have to balance all this against other activities and decision making. What are you seeing from that standpoint?
So I think when I talk to a company, I say, what percent of your business is DoD? And if it's a large chunk, I mean, they really don't have a choice. If you're if you're part of the DoD and you're making products and services, and it's any more than, let's say, 10% of your business, you're going to have to do it to survive. And I think it's bigger than that, because now that it's in the contract and everybody in the supply chain has to have CMMC 2.0, if you don't get this done soon, you're not going to be able to be part of that contract. So just think about it. Like, in the NFL, if you're a quarterback, you get hurt, it's next guy up. You may not get your job back. You might be out forever. And I think it's going to be the same thing with subcontractors. So you really have to look at who your customers are. And I have a few clients where they're the only ones that make a certain device, like let's say a part for a landing gear or something. But most companies I work with, there's other like substitutes in their industry. And even though you might have a great relationship with your prime or somebody up in the chain, they can't hire you or give you a contract unless you have the CMMC 2.0 in place. And if you have nothing in place right now, it could take 8 to 12 months to get the audit done. So you don't want to wait to the last minute, because I already have clients calling me saying they missed opportunities because they don't have the right controls in place right now. So my advice to contractors is, if this is where you want to play and this is part of your long-term strategic goals, being a defense contractor, you've really got to get moving, because, we've got to get you certified. So when these contracts come out, we got to go where the puck's going and, kind of anticipate, your business and where it's going. So as these contracts start having CMMC later in 2025, we want to make the contractors ready with kind of an all access pass to do business. So that's what we can really help with.
Great. So, and then shifting the conversation from there's obviously a need, and as you're illustrating, it's a must-have for certain contractors if they want to stay in business. So the alternatives for trying to take it on to do themselves versus working with third parties, what's there's this term external service provider, and what changes were made relative to any final ruling in CMMC 2.0 regarding ESPs?
Yeah, good question. So an ESP is an external service provider, and there's lots of different ones that usually companies that you outsource or are partnering with that are providing services for you indirect to the contract. So for example, as an MSP, I work with a lot of MSPs in the country. So they're considered an ESP or an external service provider. Until recently, under the final rule, before the final rule, or last year, it said that if you're an MSP or an external service provider providing services to a DoD contractor, you also had to have a CMMC 2.0 certification. And that got changed. So MSPs or external service providers today do not have to have a CMMC 2.0 certification. That's the good news. The bad news is they're going to be part of the audit. So we've already done a couple audits and been through a couple audits. And the company, as we do and prove all the controls are in place and help the company go through the audit, the MSP also has to have what's called a shared matrix to show the controls they're working on and how it's shared. So for example, if an MSP is doing a company that has a contract with the DoD, their backups, and they're doing them off site, let's say with Veeam or something, they got to show a shared matrix of what the MSP is doing, what the client's doing, and then how it actually is working. And it has to be kind of spelled out. And the auditor is looking at the company plus the MSP in the audit. So in theory, a company could pass the audit, but the MSP doesn't have their ducks in a row, and your client could actually fail. So part of what we do is we help, because we're a background MSP, we help the clients get ready, and also a lot of MSPs get ready. So they're going to all pass the audit together.
And so if you're a contractor or client, as you're using that term, is there advice on choosing the right consultant and auditor? And obviously cost is part of it, but what else is there besides cost?
Okay. So what happened is we've been doing audits for a long time, for many years. We do SOC 2 audits. We do ISO 27001 audits. And the audit process is very similar to CMMC 2.0. It's just a lot more rigorous. So we know how to select auditors. We know how to work with auditors. What I do know is the better the work is ready, the less price the auditor has to charge, right? Just less back and forth. They can go into a portal, look for everything, get what they need in and out. So we're kind of known for this being a really good readiness company. So I actually just had, I'll give you an example. I just had a company that we're scheduling an audit for, CMMC audit, and their price was like $62,000 they had from an auditor. I shopped around and I got a price at about $30,000. So it's about half the price. Now, there's a lot of factors that weighed in. One is I found somebody that was almost down the street from them. She didn't have like travel expenses because they have to come on site. They also know our readiness work and the capabilities that we have. So we will shop those auditors and auditor prices out. And that's part of what we do. But again, it will solidify because it's so new that the pricing's still all over the board.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so that's really helpful. And so what I'm imagining, again, all these 80,000 contractors need to go through this at some point. What's the expected timeline? Is it over this year? How long are they going to have to be compliant?
So it's a 3-year phase in, and it's tied to the contracts, right? So again, you can bid on a contract, but you can't get awarded without a CMMC 2.0. My advice to companies are, when we work with a company, they could be anywhere in the actual phase. So sometimes people say, you know what, haven't done much, I'm starting at zero. If you're starting at zero, it could take 8 months to 12 months before that audit's completed and you're certified, right? I have other companies say, you know what, I think I'm ready, but I'm not sure, and I just need you to do kind of a mock audit review and before I go to audit. And then they're pretty far along, and there's everybody in between. So, if they're pretty far along, it could just be a couple months away. Mm-hmm. So our challenge is we have to come in and pretty much size up where they're at very quickly. So I can tell you if you're, 0% or 90% or somewhere in between, and then I have to help, provide that guideline. And then normally what we do, if you're getting close, we'll start scheduling the auditor. So like for now, I'm starting to schedule auditors for like June because I know we'll have the work completely ready for certain clients, and then we can lead right into it. Now, the big challenge is if you don't get at least an 80% on the audit, you fail, right? So you don't want to fail because if you fail, you got to pay the price all over again. So the goal is to be able to have this so ready that you're going to pass the first time. We've already taken 2 companies through an audit. The first audit, we just didn't know what to expect. And, we had to go back and put a lot more information, a lot more documentation. The second time was a lot easier, but the audits are pretty rigorous. And these auditors are asking for a lot of detail and documentation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So a contractor goes through all this work, and I love the recommendation for the contractor to do as much of the work themselves before the audit, have the right people involved, have the right process involved, have the right technology, because the technology is going to accelerate adoption and all these things. So you go through and you get your audit, let's say you pass in 25. Is there an annual or biannual, or is that also driven by the contracts?
Yep. So the certification, again, follows that ISO framework. So it's a 3-year certification. So if you have a certification in 2025, you're good to go. You've got the CMMC 2.0, and you don't have to get certified again for 3 years. But you do have to do an annual risk assessment and make an annual attestation that your controls are up to date on a yearly basis. So you can't just get compliant and say, okay, I'm not doing anything for 3 years. You have to continue to do your tabletop exercises. You have to continue to update your documentation. You have to have a risk assessment. You got to keep pushing out the training. You got to look at the logs. You've got to prove that all these things are in place, and you have to attest to it every year. Mm-hmm. And then 3 years go by, then you have to do a full audit again. But hopefully it's just a matter of keeping up with the changes, and then the auditor can come in. The hard part, the heavy lifting is really that first time, getting that first framework in place.
Makes sense. So as we wind things up here for this podcast, this has been incredibly informative. I think we hit a lot of like important facts and opinion, and hopefully it's been educational. As we transition, are there any like little known facts or things that have surprised you as you've rolled your sleeves up and helped these customers, things that aren't necessarily written in the documentation?
Well, we go through a certification school that really is designed for readiness companies, and the auditors and assessors are going to a different school really to become the assessors. And for years, we were just talking in different worlds, and it just kind of came together. And what I can tell you, the big surprise to me was the SSPs, that document, and we were putting out SSPs in the 50, 60 page range that were decent amount of documentation. To get through an audit, the smallest SSP we've been able to put together is over 110 pages. This is a really intense around documentation, proving compliance, evidence. And the other thing is the auditors are asking for reports on the fly. So they could say, okay, show me a list of everybody that's been recently trained on awareness training or the last phishing test. You got to produce that report on demand. So, we've been doing audits for years, but these audits are rigorous. And not only do you have to really be prepared, you have to have somebody there at that audit who is really up to speed on every aspect of your system. So if it's an MSP or an RPO or somebody in-house, they got to be like on their game, being able to produce evidence on the fly to an auditor. So that's really was the big surprise to us. And, I think it's going to be great for the DoD, but companies really have to get ready. And I would just say that a lot of companies think they're ready, but they're not. And we can kind of review and see if they are or not. But you really got to have your ducks in a row and the proper documentation before you ever would go into an audit, because you want to pass it that first time so you don't have to do it over.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier in Choice's business that half of your business is around CMMC, and we've spent obviously all this time talking about CMMC, but I'd love your opinion and vision for what the future looks like for other maybe non-regulated industries or other regulated industries. I've heard about like a lot of the other regulation actually plays off CMMC as a starting point, or GDPR. I mean, where do you think this is all going over the next 5 years or so with currently unregulated or underregulated organizations when it comes to their cyber and data security policies?
Well, I think as a rule, I think we're going to go fast forward marching in a whole other direction. So you already have all this cybersecurity. Now you have AI and then privacy. So companies have a lot more to worry about. And what I kind of see as across the board is more and more companies want to see that their supply chain contractors have some kind of a third-party audit. In other words, we put everything in place, but they kind of want an independent company coming in to verify that all the controls and cybersecurity is in place. So we see it in financial with SOC audits. We see it in manufacturing with ISO audits. We see it in the medical with HIPAA and getting some third party and different compliances. So at the end of the day, I think every industry is going to be required to have some kind of framework, either self-assessment or third-party audit, to kind of prove that you're not going to be the on-ramp for some kind of breach to your supply chain, either up or down. Having said that, HIPAA's, right now under review. They're going to upgrade and add a lot more cybersecurity controls and kind of up the compliances. But what I clearly think I see, and I like to look at the visions, is this CMMC's taken 3 years, and it's a really good system. And now you have a readiness, all these readiness RPO organizations and all these auditors. It's going to go ripple through the rest of the government. I think that we're already starting to see some contracts and other government entities outside the DoD that are starting to look at NIST 171 controls under CMMC, and I think it's going to move through the government kind of horizontally over time.
Excellent. Steve, thank you so much. And because I love to hear you talk about CMMC and other things as often as you do with the authority that you have, we're going to do this again in the form of a webinar later in February. I think it's February 26th. If any of our listeners want to learn more about that, feel free to reach me. My email is very simple, bill@actifile.com, or you can follow us on LinkedIn or Facebook or X, or check out our website for announcements on the upcoming webinar, where we will repeat some of this, but we'll also show you a little bit more about Actifile and the technologies that we are using. And for Steve, again, thank you very much. Any final parting words or takeaways for the audience?
No, thank you very much for your time today. You know, I love talking about this. You say it's kind of a boring topic. For me, it's kind of exciting. And, you know, we really like what we do and enjoy our helping companies really get this in place and tighten things up. And again, you know, also what I see compliance, it used to be just for security and cybersecurity, but it really is for companies to get an all access pass to do business. As you're, you know, growing your business, we want to help strategize and get these right cybersecurity compliance and AI policies, procedures, and everything in place. So when somebody's asking you for these things, you know, you can just produce them very quickly and have an all access pass to do business at all times. So that's really, I think, where the future is going.
Outstanding. Thank you again. And thank you to our audience. And we hope to see you at our next data security podcast. Thank you.
Thanks.